It was 11 degrees outside. 11 degrees. And he locked the door anyway. She had nowhere to go. No keys. No wallet. No coat. Just her baby, her bare feet on a frozen doorstep, and the sound of her husband laughing on the other side of that door. Laughing, while another woman's voice floated through the walls like she already owned the place. By the time this story was over, that man had lost everything. His house, his money, his reputation, and the woman he threw out into the cold. She was the one who took it all from him, legally, methodically, and piece by piece. But here is what nobody talks about. Here is what the neighbors never knew. Here is what even her own family did not see coming. She had been planning her escape long before he ever unlocked that door for his mistress. And when he kicked her out that night, he did not just make the worst decision of his life. He handed her everything she needed to finish what she had already started. He thought he was throwing her away. He had no idea he was setting her free. Before we go any further into this story, we want to pause and connect with every single one of you watching right now. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Whether you are watching from North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, California, or anywhere in between, drop your city or state down below. This community means everything to us, and we love knowing who is on this journey with us. Now let us go back to the beginning. Because to understand everything that happened on that frozen night, you have to understand who Vanessa Caldwell was long before a man named Derek Whitfield ever walked into her life. Vanessa Caldwell grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, the second of 3 children raised by a mother named Dorothy, who worked the early shift at a distribution warehouse for most of Vanessa's childhood, and a father named Gerald, who drove long-haul freight trucks and was home maybe 100 days out of any given year. Vanessa was not raised with financial comfort. She was raised with something that would ultimately prove far more powerful than comfort. She was raised with a bone-deep, practical understanding of how money worked, how fast it could disappear, and how much of your freedom was tied directly to how much of it you controlled. That understanding did not seem significant when she was a teenager counting change for school lunch. It would become the most important thing about her by the time this story reached its end. Vanessa was the kind of student who did not need to be the loudest voice in the room to be the most noticed. She graduated high school with a solid academic record and enrolled immediately in a community college in Greensboro, working weekends at a pharmacy to cover what her financial aid did not. She completed her associate's degree in 2 years without taking a single semester off. She then transferred to North Carolina State University on a partial academic scholarship and completed a 4-year degree in accounting. She was not someone who talked about her ambitions constantly. She simply moved toward them, one deliberate step at a time, which is a quality that people often mistake for quietness when it is actually something much closer to discipline. She graduated, took her first real bookkeeping position at a logistics company in Charlotte, opened a savings account the week she received her first paycheck, and began building exactly the kind of stable, self-sufficient life she had promised herself since she was a little girl watching her mother calculate which bill could wait until Friday. Derek Whitfield was, on the surface of things, exactly the kind of man you would feel relieved to see your daughter bring home. He was tall, well-dressed in a way that looked effortless without actually being effortless, and employed as a project manager at a commercial real estate firm in Raleigh that handled contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He drove a clean car. He had an apartment he had actually decorated with intentionality, which in Vanessa's experience was not something most men his age thought to do. He cooked dinner when she came over, not elaborately, but competently, and with enough care that it registered. He was the kind of man who made every person in the room feel like the most interesting person in it. And in the beginning, Vanessa was no exception to that. In the beginning, Derek Whitfield made Vanessa Caldwell feel genuinely, completely seen. That feeling is important to understand, because it is the reason she stayed as long as she did. And it is the reason, when things began to change, the change was so difficult to name. They met at a birthday party for a mutual friend in Charlotte. They talked for nearly 3 hours that night, without either of them noticing the time moving. Vanessa told him about an accounting irregularity she had recently caught in one of her company's vendor invoices, a discrepancy that had saved her employer just over $14,000. And Derek looked at her like that was the most interesting thing he had heard in months. He texted her the following morning at a perfectly reasonable hour. Not in the middle of the night. Not 3 days later. The very next morning. Vanessa told her best friend Tanya Mercer about it that afternoon, and Tanya would later recall that Vanessa said, almost to herself, that a man who respects your time from the very beginning is already telling you something true about himself. She was right about that observation. She just did not yet know how many other things Derek was simultaneously telling her about himself, in ways that would take years to fully translate. They dated for close to 2 years before Vanessa agreed to move in with him. She had a quiet set of standards she never called standards out loud. She wanted to see how a person behaved in ordinary time, not just in the curated, carefully managed time of early courtship. She wanted to see how he handled inconvenience, whether he kept his word on small things, how he spoke to servers at restaurants and to strangers who had made an error, whether he was the same man on a Tuesday evening at home that he was on a Saturday night out with friends. For the better part of those 2 years, Derek seemed to pass every quiet test she was running. He was consistent. He was patient. He showed up when he said he would. He told her he loved her first and did not seem frightened by the weight of saying it. And Vanessa, who did not extend her trust quickly or cheaply, began extending it to Derek in careful, deliberate amounts. Looking back, the people closest to her would say the trust was never the mistake. The mistake was that Derek understood exactly how valuable her trust was and chose to use that knowledge against her. They got engaged after nearly 3 years of dating. Derek proposed on a weekend trip to Asheville, North Carolina, in the mountains, at a restaurant they had been to once before on an early date and that Vanessa had mentioned offhandedly loving. He had remembered. He had made reservations weeks in advance. He had coordinated with the restaurant to have her favorite dessert brought out with the ring. Every detail of the proposal was thoughtful in a way that communicated clearly that this man had been listening, that he paid attention, that he cared. Vanessa said yes. Of course she said yes. She had been watching this man for 3 years, and what she had seen had convinced her that this was someone worth building a life with. What she did not know yet was that Derek Whitfield was extraordinarily skilled at performing the version of himself that a woman like Vanessa most needed to see. She would not discover the distance between the performance and the reality for some time. But that distance existed from the very beginning. It was there on the night of the proposal, and it was there on the morning of their wedding, and it was there every single day in between. They married in a small ceremony in Raleigh, surrounded by family and a carefully chosen group of friends. In the months that followed, Vanessa and Derek settled into the rhythms of married life in a way that still felt, on the surface, like everything she had hoped for. They bought a house together in a quiet neighborhood in Raleigh. They furnished it slowly and with intention. They hosted dinner parties. They joined a neighborhood association. They went to a barbecue at a colleague's house one summer and stood together in the backyard looking like exactly what they appeared to be, a happy, grounded, well-matched couple. Their neighbors would later say, almost uniformly, that they looked like one of those couples you simply assume has it figured out. The kind of couple that makes you feel slightly better about love in general just by looking at them. That assumption, it turned out, was doing a tremendous amount of work that the reality underneath it could not support. 8 months into their marriage, Derek suggested they consolidate their finances entirely into a joint account. He framed it as a practical decision. It made sense for a married couple, he said. It would simplify the budgeting. It would make tax time easier. Vanessa, who had built her financial habits on the premise of careful planning and shared responsibility, agreed. She closed her personal checking account and transferred her savings. She kept a small Roth IRA that Derek did not push her to consolidate, perhaps because it was small enough that it did not seem worth the conversation. That small retirement account would matter enormously later. But at the time, it was just a small account that Vanessa barely thought about because she was busy thinking about everything else. Once the finances were combined, Derek became the primary manager of the joint account. This, too, was framed reasonably. He had more flexibility in his schedule, he said. He handled the mortgage payments for the property his firm managed, so he was already comfortable with financial logistics. It just made sense for him to be the one tracking the household account. Vanessa was working full-time and managing most of the domestic responsibilities alongside her job, so she did not argue the point. She trusted him. And in the beginning, nothing alarming happened. The bills were paid. The account was maintained. She could still see the transactions when she logged in online, and nothing looked wrong. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, Derek began making small comments whenever Vanessa spent money independently. A lunch out with a coworker. A new pair of shoes she had been waiting on a sale for. A book she bought from the display at the front of a bookstore because it caught her eye. None of these things were extravagant. None of them were financially irresponsible. But Derek had a way of asking about them that did not sound like accusation on the surface, and yet left Vanessa feeling, every single time, like she had done something that required an explanation. Tanya Mercer, Vanessa's closest friend since childhood, noticed the change in Vanessa before Vanessa had fully named it for herself. Tanya would later recall that Vanessa started calling her to talk through ordinary purchases before making them. Not large purchases, small ones. A birthday gift for a coworker. A new set of dish towels. Tanya said she asked Vanessa directly one afternoon why she was checking in about something as minor as dish towels. And Vanessa laughed it off. She said Derek just liked to know where the money was going. Tanya told her that was not normal. That the money was Vanessa's too, and that a husband who made his wife feel she needed permission to buy household supplies was not exercising sound financial management. He was exercising something else entirely. Vanessa went quiet on the phone for a long moment and then changed the subject. But Tanya did not forget that conversation. Derek's control expanded gradually from the financial to the personal. He began commenting on Vanessa's friendships in ways that seemed, at first, like affectionate concern. He would mention that a particular friend of hers seemed like a bad influence, or that spending an evening out with coworkers when she was tired seemed unnecessary. He would point out that Tanya called a lot, and ask, with a tone that was never quite hostile enough to confront directly, whether Tanya had things going on in her own life that she perhaps needed to work through rather than leaning on Vanessa for. These were not demands. Derek was far too strategic for demands. They were suggestions, observations, small rhetorical questions dropped into the middle of ordinary evenings that left Vanessa feeling vaguely guilty for things she could not quite identify. About 2 years into the marriage, Vanessa discovered she was pregnant. She called Tanya before she told Derek, which tells you something about where things already stood between them even then. Tanya said Vanessa sounded cautiously happy, not the uncomplicated, full-volume joy you would expect from a woman announcing a wanted pregnancy, but something more careful. Something that had already started doing the math on what this new development would mean for the various calculations she was quietly running in the back of her mind at all times. When she told Derek, he was pleased. Visibly, genuinely pleased. He put his hand on her face and said this was exactly what he had been hoping for. And for a short stretch of time during the pregnancy, Vanessa felt the closest thing to ease in her marriage that she had felt in over a year. Derek was attentive. He came to appointments. He set up the nursery himself on a Saturday afternoon while Vanessa sat in the doorway and watched him. She let herself believe, for those months, that a baby might be the thing that settled whatever restlessness had been quietly disrupting the ground beneath their marriage. She was not the first woman to believe that. She would not be the last. Lily was born in the early spring, healthy and loud and absolutely perfect in the way that newborns are before the world has had any time to work on them. Vanessa's mother Dorothy came and stayed for 2 weeks to help. Those 2 weeks were the happiest Vanessa seemed in years. Dorothy cooked. Tanya came over in the evenings. Lily slept in a bassinet next to the bed and Vanessa sat up nursing her in the blue pre-dawn hours and felt, in spite of her exhaustion, a specific kind of clarity she had not experienced in a very long time. The clarity of knowing exactly what mattered. The clarity of a love that asked absolutely nothing of her except presence. Dorothy left after 2 weeks, as planned. Tanya went back to her own schedule. Derek went back to work. And in the weeks that followed, alone in the house with a newborn while Derek was at the office for 10 and 11 hours at a stretch, Vanessa began to feel something she did not have a clean name for at first. It was not postpartum depression, though she would be screened for it at her 6-week checkup and the results would come back negative. It was something else. It was the particular loneliness of being in a house with someone who is physically present but emotionally somewhere else entirely. And it was the growing, unmistakable sense that Derek's behavior since Lily's arrival had not simply shifted. It had calcified into something she could no longer explain away. In the months following Lily's birth, Derek became someone Vanessa recognized less and less. He was irritable in the evenings in a way that made the whole house feel smaller. He was impatient with Lily's nighttime crying in a way that frightened Vanessa, not because he was ever physically aggressive with the baby, but because of the expression on his face when he heard it, a tightening of the jaw, a visible effort to contain something, that made Vanessa instinctively put herself between Derek and the bassinet without consciously deciding to do so. He worked later and later. He traveled for work more frequently than he ever had before. He came home smelling like a different cologne sometimes, a subtle difference that Vanessa noticed the way she noticed everything. Without announcing it, without filing it anywhere she could easily retrieve, but storing it in the back of her mind in the careful, undramatic way she stored all the things she was not yet ready to act on. He stopped asking about her day. He stopped initiating the kind of ordinary domestic conversation that is the connective tissue of a functioning marriage. He sat beside her on the couch in the evenings and was so thoroughly absent that his physical presence felt almost crueler than if he had simply not been there. Vanessa went back to work part-time when Lily was 4 months old, taking on freelance bookkeeping clients she could handle from home during nap times and after Lily went to bed. She had maintained her professional license throughout the marriage, which Derek had occasionally questioned the necessity of given that she was not working a full-time job outside the home. She had kept it anyway. She could not have explained precisely why at the time. It was the same quiet instinct that had made her keep the small retirement account when everything else was consolidated. Vanessa Caldwell was not someone who ignored her instincts. She had simply been in a situation for long enough that ignoring them had temporarily seemed like the more manageable option. That period was coming to an end, and when it ended, it would end with a kind of precision that Derek Whitfield had fundamentally underestimated. It began with a number that did not add up. Vanessa had always been the kind of person who looked at numbers the way other people look at faces, not because she was suspicious by nature, but because numbers were her native language, and inconsistency in that language registered to her the way a wrong note registers to someone with perfect pitch. She was reviewing the household's monthly bank statement one evening while Lily slept, running through the transactions the way she always did, and she noticed a transfer she did not recognize. It was not a large amount, less than $300, and it was listed only as a transfer to an external account, without a vendor name or a description that told her anything about where it had gone. She told herself it was probably something Derek had set up for a utilities auto payment or an insurance policy she had forgotten about. She made a note of the account number it had gone to and closed the laptop. But she did not forget the number. She never forgot numbers. Over the following weeks, she noticed more transfers. They were never the same amount twice. They never fell into a recognizable pattern of frequency. They ranged from just under $100 to several hundred, and they went to the same external account every single time. An account whose number she did not recognize and whose institution she could not immediately identify. She did not confront Derek. This was not because she was afraid of the conversation, though she had learned by then that conversations with Derek that touched on anything he did not want to discuss had a way of becoming conversations about her. Her suspiciousness, her need to manage everything, her inability to simply trust him. She did not confront him because she understood, with the cold clarity of someone who had spent a career studying financial records, that confronting someone before you have documented everything they have done is the fastest way to ensure the evidence disappears. So she documented. She printed statements. She noted the dates and amounts of every transfer she could identify going back as far as her access to the records allowed. She put the printed pages in a folder. She put the folder in a bag. And one Saturday morning while Derek was at the gym, she drove to a storage facility several miles from their neighborhood and rented a unit in her name only, using a credit card she had quietly reactivated, a card from before their marriage that Derek did not know still existed. And she put the folder there. That storage unit was the beginning of everything. It was the first concrete move in a process that Vanessa had not yet named but was already, on some cellular level, fully committed to. She did not know yet exactly what she would find when she kept pulling the thread. She did not know yet about the full scope of what Derek had been doing with the money. She did not know about the second account's total balance, or the tax returns, or the deliberate, calculated nature of the concealment. She knew only that something was wrong, that the numbers were telling her so, and that she was not going to ignore what the numbers said. Not this time. Not anymore. Her name was Amber Kowalski. She was 26 years old, worked at a fitness studio not far from Derek's office in Raleigh. She met Derek when his company booked a corporate wellness event at the studio where she worked. He was charming in the setting the way he was charming in every setting. Engaged, attentive, quick with a compliment that felt specific rather than generic. He asked for her number at the end of the event, and she gave it to him. He did not mention, at that point, that he had a wife at home who was 4 months pregnant. He told her his marriage was essentially over, that it had been over for a long time, that he and his wife were staying together through a transition period for practical reasons, but that there was nothing real between them anymore. Amber would later say that she believed him, because he said it the way people say things when they are telling the truth, without hesitation, without the particular quality of overcorrection that characterizes a lie being worked at. She believed him because Derek Whitfield had spent the better part of his adult life perfecting the ability to say things convincingly. It was, in many ways, his primary skill. By the time Amber found out that Vanessa was not just his wife, but a pregnant woman in the 3rd trimester of a pregnancy, she and Derek had already been seeing each other for nearly 3 months. She found out not because Derek told her, but because she saw a photograph on his phone. He had left it on the counter while he showered, and she had not meant to look at it. But the screen lit up with a notification, and the preview showed a photograph of a woman with a very visible baby bump, captioned with the name Vanessa. Amber confronted him that night. Derek's explanation was smooth and well-constructed, the way all of his explanations were. He acknowledged the pregnancy, acknowledged that things were more complicated than he had initially described, and then did what he always did when cornered, which was to make the conversation about his suffering. He described a marriage that had become a trap, a wife who had grown cold and controlling, a child he had not planned for in a relationship that was already dying. He cried, which was something Amber had not seen him do before, and it landed with the weight it was intended to carry. She stayed. In the months leading up to that frozen night, Vanessa was doing 2 things simultaneously that had almost nothing to do with each other on the surface and everything to do with each other underneath. On the surface, she was being a wife and a mother. She was caring for Lily, managing the household, taking on bookkeeping clients, attending neighborhood events, bringing a casserole to a neighbor who had just had surgery. She was doing all of the things that made her legible, from the outside, as exactly the kind of woman she appeared to be. Underneath all of that, she was building a case. She had contacted a family law attorney, a woman named Gloria Patterson, who had more than 2 decades of experience in North Carolina family law, and who specialized specifically in cases involving financial abuse and coercive control within marriage. Vanessa found her through a legal aid resource she accessed from a library computer one afternoon, not because she was hiding from Derek specifically, but because she had learned enough about how he monitored things to know that certain searches were better made on devices he did not have access to. Her first consultation with Gloria Patterson lasted 2 hours. Vanessa brought a folder with the financial documentation she had already collected, the printed bank statements, the noted transfers to the unknown external account, the credit card records showing charges and locations, and at times that conflicted with what Derek had told her he was doing. Gloria Patterson had been in family law for long enough to recognize, in the first 30 minutes of meeting Vanessa, that she was sitting across from someone who had done her homework in a way that most clients simply did not. Most people who came to her office came after the crisis, scattered and underprepared. Vanessa came before it, organized and focused, with a clear understanding of what she had and what she still needed. Gloria told her what to keep gathering. Vanessa gathered it. Over the following months, every significant financial document she could access was copied and stored. Tax returns going back several years, mortgage statements, investment account records, business expense reports that she had occasionally helped Derek organize and that she now reviewed with a different eye than she had when she was simply trying to be a helpful spouse. And it was in those expense reports and the receipts and the reimbursement records and the small, accumulated financial paperwork of a man who believed his wife was not paying close enough attention that she found the clearest evidence of what he had been doing. What Vanessa uncovered, piece by piece, over the course of those months, was not a minor financial indiscretion. It was not a few $100s redirected here or there in ways that might have been attributed to poor communication or financial carelessness. What she uncovered, with the assistance of a forensic accountant that Gloria Patterson connected her with, a meticulous and highly credentialed professional named Dr. Renee Smith, was evidence of a sustained, deliberate, calculated scheme. Derek had been transferring money out of their joint marital assets over a period of nearly 2 years. The transfers were structured specifically to avoid the kinds of automatic flags that larger, more regular transfers would trigger. They varied in amount. They varied in timing. They followed no identifiable pattern except the pattern of someone who understood financial oversight systems well enough to move around them strategically. The total, when Dr. Renee finished her initial accounting, came to more than $67,000. $67,000 that Derek had moved, piece by small piece, into a private account that Vanessa was never meant to find. Beyond the hidden account, there were the tax returns. 2 consecutive years of joint tax filings in which Derek's income had been underreported, not dramatically, not in ways that would immediately catch an untrained eye, but underreported nonetheless, in amounts that added up across both years to more than $30,000 in concealed earnings. Derek Whitfield had not simply been a bad husband. He had been a financial predator operating inside his own marriage. And he had done it while maintaining, for the benefit of neighbors and co-workers and social media followers, the appearance of a man who had everything together. The gap between the appearance and the reality was not just wide. It was the width of a courtroom, and Vanessa intended to make him stand inside it. The night everything broke open did not begin with a fight. It began with a car in the driveway. Vanessa had put Lily to bed early that evening. The baby had a low fever, the kind that is not dangerous but that makes a small child miserable and clingy and in need of extra holding. Vanessa had sat with her until she fell asleep, hand on Lily's back, listening to her breathe even out. She came downstairs, made herself a cup of tea, and sat down at the kitchen table with the quiet that descends on a house after a baby finally sleeps. She was still sitting there when she heard Derek's car pull into the driveway. He came through the front door fast, without the usual routine of hanging up his coat or setting down his bag. He walked directly into the kitchen, and he was already talking before he had fully entered the room. He told her he needed her to leave. Those were his first words. Not a greeting. Not a transition. He needed her to leave, and he needed her to take the baby. Vanessa set down her tea. She asked him what he meant. He told her she knew what he meant. He told her he had been trying to figure out how to handle this the right way, but that there was no right way, and that he was done putting it off. She asked him where she was supposed to go. He said that was not something he could help with. She asked him if there was someone else. He looked at his phone. The particular quality of that silence, the way he did not answer but did not deny it, the way his eyes went to the phone instead of to her, told her everything she needed to know. She had suspected it for months. She had found evidence that pointed toward it without definitively confirming it. Now she was watching confirmation happen in real time, in the form of a man who could not bring himself to look at his wife when she asked him the most direct question she had ever asked him. And then she heard the car door. She walked to the front window. In the driveway, behind Derek's car, sat a dark SUV she had never seen before. A woman was getting out of it. Young, dark coat, and she was pulling a suitcase out of the back of the vehicle. A suitcase, not an overnight bag, not a tote with a change of clothes. A suitcase, the kind you pack when you are not planning to leave. Vanessa stood at that window and looked at the suitcase for a long moment. She had known, in the abstract, that something like this was probably coming. She had been preparing for it, in her quiet, methodical way, for months. But knowing something is coming and watching it arrive at your front door on wheels while your baby sleeps upstairs with a fever are two entirely different things. She turned around. Derek was already walking to the front door. She told him their daughter was upstairs. She told him Lily had a fever. She told him it was 11 degrees outside. He opened the front door. He said she should get her coat. And then he stepped aside to let Amber into the house. Vanessa asked Derek for her car keys. He told her the car was registered in his name and that she was not taking it. She asked for her purse. He handed it to her. She asked Derek to let her go upstairs and get Lily. He did not physically stop her. She went up, woke her daughter as gently as she could, bundled her in as many layers as she could put on a half-asleep toddler quickly, and came back downstairs with the baby on her hip. Amber was standing in the kitchen by then. She did not look at Vanessa. Vanessa did not speak to her. She walked past her, through the front door, and onto the porch. Derek closed the door behind her. She heard the lock. She stood on that porch in the dark and the cold with 11-degree air pressing in from every direction and her daughter's warm weight against her chest and $42 in cash in a purse whose debit card had been removed by the man who had just locked the door. She was wearing house socks. Not boots, not slippers, thin cotton dress socks, because she had not been given any warning that she was going to be standing outside in January. The porch light was on. She stood in its yellow circle for a moment. Then she reached into her purse, found her phone, and called Tanya. Tanya answered on the second ring. Vanessa told her, in a voice that the people who know her say was calmer than it had any right to be, where she was and what had happened, and that she needed a ride. Tanya was in her car before Vanessa finished the sentence. While she waited on that porch, Vanessa opened the notes application on her phone and began typing. She typed the time. She typed the temperature. She typed every word Derek had said to her, in order, as precisely as she could reconstruct them. She typed a description of the suitcase. She typed that Lily had a fever and was not wearing shoes. She typed that her debit card had been removed from her purse. She typed that she had asked for her keys and been refused. She typed Amber's first name, because she had heard Derek say it earlier and had stored it. She kept typing until she heard Tanya's headlights sweeping across the end of the block. Every word she typed that night was later submitted as a time-stamped contemporaneous record in a legal proceeding that Derek Whitfield did not know was already, in every practical sense, underway. Tanya Mercer drove 40 minutes across Raleigh in the middle of a bitter January night to get to that porch, and what she saw when her headlights landed on Vanessa is something she has described multiple times in the years since. Always in the same way, always with the same detail. Vanessa was sitting on the top step of the porch. Lily was asleep on her chest, wrapped in a receiving blanket Vanessa had grabbed on her way out the door. They were both covered by a single throw blanket from the living room basket near the front door, the only thing Vanessa had been able to reach on her way out without slowing down enough to give Derek a reason to say something else. Tanya said the thing that hit her hardest was not the cold, and it was not the baby, and it was not the socks. It was Vanessa's face. She was not crying. She was not in visible distress. She was sitting on that step in 11-degree weather with a sick baby and $42 and no car and no coat. And she looked, Tanya said, like a woman who had already decided what she was going to do next and was simply waiting for her ride. In the car, with the heat running and Lily transferred to a blanket in the back seat, Vanessa made 3 phone calls. She called a locksmith, not for the house on Glenbrook Drive, but for the storage unit, to verify access arrangements, because some portion of her mind was already moving through the checklist of what came next. She called Gloria Patterson's after-hours line and left a message with a brief, factual account of what had happened, noting the time, the temperature, the missing debit card, and the presence of a third party who had moved in with a suitcase. And then she called her mother. Dorothy answered on the first ring, because mothers of daughters like Vanessa seem to answer on the first ring when it matters. Vanessa told her what had happened in the same calm, organized way she had told Tanya. Dorothy asked if Lily was safe. Vanessa said yes. Dorothy asked if Vanessa was safe. Vanessa said yes. Then Dorothy said, "Baby, you know what to do. You have always known what to do. Now go do it." And Vanessa said, "Yes, ma'am." And that was the end of the phone call. While Vanessa and Lily slept at Tanya's apartment, Lily's fever breaking sometime in the pre-dawn hours, Vanessa and not sleeping at all, Derek Whitfield was waking up to what he genuinely believed was the first morning of a better life. Amber had unpacked her suitcase. There was coffee made. The house felt different to him. Or so he would later tell people, lighter somehow, like a pressure he had been living under had finally been released. He texted a friend, a man named Kevin who had known him since college, and told him that things with Vanessa were finally done and that he was happier than he had been in years. Kevin, who would later be contacted as part of the legal proceedings and who handed over that text message without being asked twice, said he had thought at the time that Derek seemed almost giddy. Not relieved, not settled, not at peace. Giddy, the way someone is when they think they have gotten away with something. He did not call a lawyer that morning. He did not reach out to Vanessa about Lily. What he did do was post on social media a photograph of a sunrise, a caption about new beginnings. The post received 47 likes before his attorney eventually, urgently, advised him to take it down. By then, Gloria Patterson had already seen it and screenshotted it. Gloria Patterson called Vanessa back first thing the following morning. By the end of that call, she had begun drafting an emergency motion for temporary custody of Lily, citing specific documented facts: the child's fever on the night in question, Her removal from the marital home without adequate clothing or medical resources, the sub-freezing temperature, and the fact that Derek had made no attempt to contact his daughter's primary caregiver in the hours since. The temporary custody arrangement was approved within days, placing Lily primarily in Vanessa's care pending a full hearing. Within a week, Gloria had filed for legal separation. Within 2 weeks, she had retained Dr. Renee, the forensic accountant, to begin a formal analysis of the marital finances going back as far as the records allowed. The legal machinery that Vanessa had spent months quietly preparing to set in motion was now in motion, and it was moving with a speed and precision that Derek Whitfield, still settling into his new domestic arrangement on Glenbrook Drive, had not begun to anticipate. Derek, informed of the separation filing, finally called an attorney of his own. He chose a man named Stuart Boggs, a Raleigh attorney whose primary practice was in commercial litigation, not family law. People who knew Derek said the choice of Boggs was deliberate, that Derek had selected him specifically because he was the most expensive attorney he could find quickly, and because Derek was still, even now, operating from a position of assumed dominance. He wanted to send a message with his choice of counsel. The message he sent, inadvertently, was that he had made a strategic error at a moment when strategic errors were going to cost him significantly. Because Stuart Boggs was an excellent commercial litigator, he was not a family law specialist, and the case Vanessa's team was building was not a commercial case. It was a meticulously documented, forensically supported, witness-backed family law case that was going to require a level of specialized knowledge and courtroom instinct that Boggs would spend the entire proceeding trying to approximate. He never quite got there. Among the many pieces of evidence that Vanessa's legal team assembled in the months following that January night, one detail stood out with a particular, quiet ferocity that courtroom observers would later say was the moment the case stopped being complicated and became simply devastating. It was the debit card. Specifically, the question of where it had gone and when. Investigators working with Vanessa's legal team pulled security camera footage from a gas station located 2 blocks from the Glenbrook Drive house. That footage showed Derek's vehicle at the pump at approximately 6:58 in the evening on the night in question, 32 minutes before he walked through the front door and told Vanessa to leave. A transaction recorded at that gas station at 6:59 used the debit card linked to the joint account. The card that Vanessa had found missing from her purse later that night. Derek had stopped at a gas station on his way home, used the joint debit card, and then, once he was inside the house, removed that card from his wife's purse before telling her she needed to go, without a car, without access to the bank account, with $42 in cash and a sick baby in dress socks on a January night. When this evidence was presented in court, the judge, a woman named the Honorable Patricia Givens, who had presided over Wake County Family Court for more than a decade, and who was not, by any account, someone easily moved to editorializing, paused the proceedings for a long moment after it was laid out before her. She looked at the documentation. She looked at Derek, and in her written ruling, delivered several months later, she used 2 words to describe the removal of that debit card and the events of that evening. She called it calculated cruelty. Those 2 words appeared in every single news report that covered this case. They appeared on the legal blogs that analyzed the ruling. They were referenced by family law attorneys in continuing education seminars as an example of how a judge documents deliberate financial abuse within a marriage. Calculated cruelty. 2 words that Derek Whitfield had earned on a gas station stop 32 minutes before he destroyed his own life. By the time several weeks had passed since she moved into the Glenbrook Drive house, Amber was understanding, in real and uncomfortable detail, exactly what she had walked into. The version of Derek she had been given in the beginning, the man in a dying marriage, generous and candid and worth the complicated position she had put herself in, was revealing itself to be a construction. She was seeing, up close and daily, the version of Derek that Vanessa had lived with. The irritability that arrived without warning. The way he managed information, telling her partial truths that only became comprehensible much later when she found the missing pieces herself. The drinking, which had increased. The way he responded to any question he did not want to answer by making the question seem like an attack. She began asking him things about the night Vanessa and Lily had left. What Vanessa had been wearing. Whether Lily had shoes. Whether Vanessa had money. Derek's answers were vague and dismissive in a way that told her, plainly, that the answers he was not giving her were worse than the ones he was. She started doing her own thinking in the quiet hours when Derek was asleep. She started putting together a picture that she did not like looking at. She moved out. She found a separate apartment across town, and she packed her own suitcase and she left. And the relationship with Derek did not survive her departure by any meaningful measure. And then, some weeks after she had settled into her new place and put enough distance between herself and Glenbrook Drive to think clearly, Amber did something that nobody in this story, not Vanessa, not Tanya, not Gloria Patterson, not even Derek in his worst imaginings, had seen coming. She called Gloria Patterson's office. She asked to speak with someone on Vanessa's legal team. She said she had information that she believed was relevant. Gloria Patterson took the call personally. What Amber had were text messages. Messages from Derek, going back more than a year, in which he discussed, in specific and operational terms, his plan to remove Vanessa from the marital home, clear out the financial accounts she would need to fight back, and position himself to keep the house and the majority of their shared assets. One message, sent many months before that January night, read in its entirety. Once I get her out, the house is mine, the account is cleared, and she has got nothing to fight with. Nothing to fight with. He had written that, in a text message, to his girlfriend, who had just handed it to his wife's attorney. Whatever Derek Whitfield had believed about the intelligence of his plan, he had clearly not factored in the possibility that the person he had recruited to help him execute it might one day decide she did not want to be part of it. Judge Patricia Givens delivered her ruling, and it was as thorough and as unsparing as the evidence before her warranted. Vanessa was awarded primary physical custody of Lily, with Derek receiving structured visitation subject to a parenting evaluation that the court ordered based on the documented pattern of behavior within the marital home. The marital home itself, the house on Glenbrook Drive, the house with the porch and the lock and the yellow circle of light, was ordered sold. Vanessa received 60% of the net sale proceeds. Derek was ordered to repay the full amount he had moved into the hidden account, with interest calculated from the date of the initial transfer. The tax matter was referred separately to the appropriate revenue authorities for their own review and action. The legal fees Derek had accumulated with Stuart Boggs, combined with the court-ordered financial obligations, consumed the vast majority of what remained in the secret account he had spent nearly 2 years building. The account he had built specifically so that Vanessa would have nothing to fight with had, in the end, paid almost entirely for the cost of fighting her. On the day the ruling was read, Tanya was sitting beside Vanessa in that courtroom. She watched Vanessa's face through the entire reading. Vanessa did not cry. She did not exhale with visible relief. She did not look at Derek. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the judge, and she nodded. Once, at the end, in the way that a person nods when they have heard something that confirms what they already knew was true. Tanya said it was the most composed she had ever seen another human being in a moment that would have unmade almost anyone else. And then court was adjourned, and they walked out into the afternoon light together, and Tanya bought them both coffee from a shop across the street. And they sat in the car in the parking garage, and Vanessa finally said something. She said, "I knew when he handed me that purse that the card was going to be missing. I knew it before I even looked." She took a sip of her coffee. "I just needed to write it down before I forgot what it felt like." That was all she said. Then she called her mother. Derek Whitfield appealed the ruling. The appeal was reviewed and denied. The tax investigation that followed the court's referral resulted in a back tax assessment with penalties that added a significant additional financial burden to the obligations he was already carrying. He fell behind on some of those obligations in the first year and had to enter into a formal payment arrangement. His credit rating dropped substantially. He was passed over for a promotion at his real estate firm around the same time. Raleigh's commercial real estate world is not a large one, and the details of a court ruling that uses the phrase calculated cruelty have a way of circulating in professional networks whether anyone intends them to or not. Within roughly 2 years of the ruling, Derek had left Raleigh. He relocated to Atlanta, reportedly to take a position with a new firm, at a salary that represented a meaningful step backward from where he had been. He continues, by legal obligation, to pay child support. He sees Lily on the schedule the court established. People who have observed those visits say he is present for them. Whether that presence reflects genuine growth or the simple arithmetic of legal consequence is something only Derek can answer. The rest of us can only note that the man who laughed on the other side of a locked door on the coldest night of the year is no longer laughing in any way that anyone can hear. Amber stayed in Raleigh. She kept her job at the fitness studio. Some months after the legal proceedings concluded, she wrote Vanessa a letter. She mailed it to Tanya's address, which she had found through a mutual contact, because she did not have Vanessa's new address and had not felt she had the right to ask for it. In the letter she apologized, not for the relationship itself, which she said was between her and her own conscience and not something she expected Vanessa's forgiveness to cover. She apologized specifically for the night of the porch, for being the reason the door was locked, for not asking more questions sooner, for arriving with a suitcase to a house where a baby was sleeping upstairs with fever. She said she had not known about the fever. She said she wished she had known. She said she thought about that porch more than she expected to. Vanessa read the letter. She kept it. She did not respond to it, at least not in any documented way. When she was asked about Amber in a conversation later, she said only that she did not think Amber was the central figure in this story that people sometimes wanted to make her. She said Amber had also been lied to, had also been managed, had also been given a version of reality that served Derek's purposes rather than her own. She said the call to Gloria Patterson's office had mattered. She said she was still working out what to do with all of it. That answer, from Vanessa, is probably the most honest thing anyone ever said. Vanessa Caldwell. She returned to her maiden name within a year of the separation, used the proceeds from the home sale to put a deposit on a townhouse in Durham, 25 minutes from Tanya. She went back to work full-time at an accounting firm that specializes in financial forensics, the field, almost precisely, that had provided her with the tools to document her own situation and build her own case. She has said in conversations since that watching Dr. Renee work in that courtroom was one of the most clarifying professional experiences of her life. She said that she wants to be someone who helps other people find the numbers that tell the truth when the truth is being hidden. Lily is a small person now, old enough to have opinions and preferences and the specific, ungovernable energy of a child who has been loved consistently and well. She calls Tanya Annie T. She likes dinosaurs. She does not like nap time. She is, by every account, completely fine, which is the best possible ending this story could have for the person in it who deserved it most. Dorothy, Vanessa's mother, visited them in Durham not long after Vanessa moved into the townhouse. Tanya was there too. They had dinner at the kitchen table in the new house, the three of them plus Lily, and by all accounts it was the loudest and most ordinary evening imaginable. Dorothy cried again, the way she had cried at the wedding. But this time she knew exactly what she was crying about. She was crying because her daughter was at a table in a house that was hers, in a life that was hers, with her child in a high chair and her best friend across from her, and nobody was going to take any of it. Not this time. Derek Whitfield stood on the right side of a locked door on the coldest night of the year and believed, completely and without doubt, that he had won. He had the house. He had the money, or so he thought. He had the woman he had chosen. He had positioned his wife with no car, no coat, no access to the bank account, and nowhere to go. By every calculation he had made, she had nothing left to fight with. What he had failed to calculate was the storage unit, the private attorney, the credit card he did not know about, the forensic accountant, the text messages sitting on Amber's phone, the time-stamped notes typed on a porch in 11-degree weather and dress socks, the friend who drove 40 minutes without asking why, the mother who answered on the first ring, the judge who would one day use the words calculated cruelty in a written ruling that would follow his name in professional circles for years. He failed to calculate Vanessa. He looked at a woman he had spent years making smaller, and he failed, completely, to see what she actually was. And that failure, that specific, catastrophic underestimation of the person he thought he had already defeated, was the thing that destroyed him. Not the court, not the attorney, not the forensic accountant. Vanessa did it. She did it quietly and methodically and with the patience of someone who had been waiting a very long time to be exactly as formidable as she had always been. So here is the question we leave you with, and we want you to really sit with it before you scroll past. When you think about every decision Vanessa made, the storage unit, the private consultations, the documentation, the notes app on the porch, do you see a woman who was victimized? Or do you see a woman who was already 3 moves ahead of someone who had no idea the game had already begun? And what does it say about the world we have built? About how we structure finances and power and trust within intimate relationships? That she had to be that precise, that prepared, that relentlessly disciplined, just to survive her own marriage and emerge from it with her daughter and her name and her life intact. Was justice served in that way, County Courtroom? Or did it arrive too late and in the wrong room, when the place it was really needed was a porch in January with a baby and $42 and 11 degrees of cold pressing in from every direction? Drop your answer in the comments below. We read every single one, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. We will see you in the next story. Thanks for watching.